Welcome to the Wisdom of Grief podcast. Today's episode focuses on one of the biggest obstacles in grief, and that is guilt. Guilt can keep us stuck, overwhelmed, and disconnected from the healing process. But the good news is we can recognize guilt, understand its role, and reset it. So first, let's recognize it. What does guilt look like in grief? It can be very obvious, like feeling guilty for not being a better partner, parent, or friend. And it can also be disguised. So let's start with some more of the obvious things, like regretting things you did or didn't do, or like said or didn't say when you have lost a loved one. And here's where hindsight bias comes in, because hindsight bias tells us that we should have known better. The thing is, we didn't know at the time. We didn't know that this might be our last opportunity to say or have a certain type of interaction. So when we blame ourselves for not seeing signs of illness or distress, or for not having the conversation we'd hoped we would have had, we have to be careful, because hindsight really works against us in grief. We have to account for that. But other times guilt is like hiding. It's kind of clever. It hides in emotions like disloyalty, like feeling bad for experiencing moments of joy. It hides in shame and self-blame, like punishing yourself for wanting to heal. And it hides itself in survivor guilt, like feeling like unworthy of happiness or life after loss. And here are some examples of disguised guilt. Like, so if you feel bad for finding humor or lightness in life, because humor and joy are kind of natural reliefs, and life is really multi-layered, and all layers, sadness, laughter, and everything in between deserve space. So, permission is really our friend in grief. If guilt is the enemy, then permission is our friend. So giving ourselves permission to have humor and joy, it's really not connected to how much we loved or how much pain we're in. It actually means both can coexist at the same time. Another way, an example of kind of disguised guilt is moving forward after loss, like feeling guilty for wanting companionship or intimacy or partnership after losing a spouse, for example. And it's so important to recognize that healing doesn't mean we've forgotten our loved one. It stays in our heart. Marriage stays in our heart. Love stays in our heart. And, humans are one of the only animals and life species that actually make ourselves feel guilty for healing. And healing doesn't mean we've forgotten our loved ones. Like, we don't feel guilty for healing a broken leg. Why do we do this with our hearts? I think, as we know intellectually, moving forward honors life and love. It does not diminish it. So another example of disguised guilt is emotional numbness, like a kind of anhedonia, which is this inability to feel pleasure. And numbness and disconnection are different from the shock that we feel that's very common in the first year, but there's this numbness and connection, this kind of anhedonia that can come from unresolved guilt. And long-term anhedonia often comes from the belief that we don't deserve happiness. So exploring and resetting that guilt is the key to reconnecting with joy. So we are unique in punishing ourselves for wanting to survive and thrive after loss. And recognizing this allows us to work with rather than against our natural resilience. So let's do the 3-step guilt reset. So the first step is find and acknowledge your guilt. So identify where guilt is showing up for you and name it. Is it tied to joy? Is it tied to survival? Is it tied to moving forward? Is it tied to feeling any kind of pleasure at all? So just identify and name where you're feeling guilty in your own grieving process. And it could be all these things. And look, often it is. It's very difficult. But this is part of the mindset of working with grief, is we need to learn to tame some of the natural tendencies of the mind to keep us towards our negative, like towards the negativity bias. We need to work with those in order to help ourselves heal. because we're healing mind and heart. So that's step one, identify where it's showing up for you. Just become aware of it. Then number two is put it into perspective. Like, get behind yourself. Don't abandon yourself in your grief and honor your resilience, because thriving after loss does not mean forgetting or minimizing love. It actually means honoring love. And so it's a really important part. And there's also like an exercise for guilt in grief, which, we often do, which is write a letter to yourself in the voice of your loved one. And think about, what would they say to you? Like, you actually know what they would say to you because it's internalized in your heart. So a lot of clients feel like their loved ones will say, I want you to be happy. It hurts my heart to see you sad. And please do not let this loss stop you from the gift of life, from engaging with life again. So try the letter if it feels safe for you, if it feels like it's going to help. Remember, the big rule in grief is don't do it if it's going to deplete you. Only do it if it's going to feed you and ease your sorrow. So you might try that. So that's step two, is putting it into perspective and getting behind yourself and giving yourself permission to move forward and heal. Healing is so important. So number three is apply the antidote. That means when we have any kind of a wound, and guilt is really part of the wound, then we need to identify what is the antidote to guilt. So what is the antidote to guilt? The antidote to guilt is really mercy. And this includes self-worth, it includes forgiveness, it includes compassion. So applying the antidote looks like this. It looks like reminding yourself, I deserve to heal. Healing does not mean I accept the unacceptable. Like, loss is unacceptable. It's so painful. Of course, we're not accepting that piece of it, but we are accepting that we deserve to heal. We're accepting that healing is part of loss. And thriving does not mean I didn't love deeply. It actually honors that love. So, to my mind, and what I've told myself in my own losses, is that if I don't live fully, it's like there are two deaths. It's like I lost the person I loved, and I lost myself because I lost my access to joy. So I lost my own inner life. And that is not what my loved one would want. And you can ask yourself if it's what your loved one would want. And if it would be causing them pain, if they could see you like this. So permission is the medicine to guilt. And that's the 3-step guilt reset. And here I want to just end, because we're good. We're going to let go of this guilt. It's the beginning of the year. It's a perfect time to do it. And I want to close that with a kind of reminder that you are your own best friend in grief. So give yourself, yourself best. You're going to be with yourself for the rest of your life. And so you can be a really good partner to yourself. You can give yourself the love, care, patience, and kindness that you need to heal from anything. And by doing so, you honor both life and your lost loved one. So today's end quote is by Matt Haig, this author who I just found in love. He talks a lot about guilt. And he says, you can't control the past, but you can control how it shapes you. You can control how you let it affect your present and your future. So take time to reflect on this and think about how it lands for you. And until next time, I wish you peace as you tread the waters of grief. See you next time.